Join me as I create this abandoned motel for my Abandoned USA diecast diorama town. I start with a chunk of foam and I just draw my design right out onto it. I'm using balsa wood and I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all my little pieces and designs and pre-paint the areas that need to be done. Like a normal human being, I make mistakes sometimes, so I usually will tear those out and fix them because it's important to me to have my design looking how I envision it. So even if I make a mistake, I will go back and I will fix those little problems. I'm just using a watered down black method and I'm painting the insides here of the room so they look a little grimy. You're actually not going to really see in a lot of these rooms, but the effect will be there when you look through the doors or windows. And if I feel like the black is too much, I can just go back in and fix it with the blue again. I've had several comments that say that people have seen this motel from New Jersey to Florida to Arizona and even in video games. That's because this is a popular mid-century design. When tourists became a thing, these motels were built all over the United States so people could travel and stay in them. I made a lot of furniture for in the rooms and in the lobby, and I just used some junk I had to make the chairs. And I used the balsa wood to make the beds and the countertops. And I put some wallpaper down for the flooring and made it look grimy. And I added some broken windows in there too. And I just used some printouts to put as posters on the back wall of the lobby. For the beds, I used Mr. Clean Magic Eraser for the mattress and just paper towels for the bed covers and some red paper for the carpet. And I used that same red paper for the curtains. And I've got my stairs started in the back there. Some people make dioramas for railroads, but I wanted to make them for all my Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. Most of my time is waiting for paint and glue to dry and holding everything in place. I use cardstock or actually boxes from food like cereal boxes, and I cut those down for my trim for my doors and windows. I like to add all the trim and paint most things before I glue it down so it's easier and more accessible for me. Now I'm starting at the second floor part of the windmill. I've just cut at an angle that I felt worked and just went with that. I call the yellow tobacco yellow because I wanted the walls to look like they were stained really bad from all the tobacco use in these rooms from all the eras that have come and visited this place. Each room has a different degree of abandonment, from one room having everything in it still, to another room being completely stripped bare, all the way to another room that's had some fire and smoke damage. I kept out a few of the railings to look like maybe they were kicked out on the stairwell. Now, using that same cereal box, I've made the shingles to go onto the roof of the windmill section of my motel. I just paint the missing spots black and then I go through and paint everything brown, and I'll come back and do some more work to that later. And then I'll come through on the trim and I'll just sparingly put some white around to look like the white is chipped away. If I used a paint crackling method, the crackle would just be too big and not small enough to look as tiny as I'd want it to. Oh, my favorite part is cutting out the swimming pool. I've got one of those hot foam cutters and I just slowly just keep cutting out little sections till I get to where I want. And then I'll fill it full of joint compound. I'll let this dry, sand it down, and do this over and over again till it's as smooth as I can get it. That balsa wood will be great for the concrete pad that goes around the edge of the swimming pool. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that down and then seal that with some primer so it doesn't warp on me. And don't forget the sides of the swimming pool. Moving on over to the second part of the motel. Well, they delivered the tiles a week early and placed them in the worst place possible. Now I gotta move that whole stack just so I can paint the decking. With the missing footage of how I made these tiles, I'll just let you know I used some oven baked clay and I put it through my pasta roller. I baked it and then I cut them up into little tile pieces, and those will go around the swimming pool. Here's video showing more of the motel and the other little rooms that I've put in and their little windows. For my abandoned motel, I wanted one section to look like it was boarded up, so I just painted some cardstock to look like plywood. I'm building the other stairwell for the other end of the motel. I picked out a motel when I Googled abandoned motel images, and there was a coral colored one, and that is the design I am going after, especially for my staircase and the railings and a few other trim pieces. One day I may actually learn how to do staircases perfectly, but until then, I feel like my plywood is pretty good. I'm just using some plastic packaging for my windows, and I just cut them up or put little holes in them to make them look broken and cracked. It gives a really nice effect to it, and it's really easy to do. Well, I've got the second floor up. I've got all the furniture put in all the rooms. And next I'll just make the top to go over this section. I cut up some kebab sticks to use as my posts. They have a great texture that makes them already look beat up. Yeah, there's a building violation here. These rails are not up to code, so just don't call OSHA on me. I would appreciate that. I used a layer of joint compound for the parking lot, and then I just mixed some black and white gesso and just put a base coat on everything. I used the pouncing method because the gesso actually has a nice bite to it and it'll give me a nice texture. Making a parking lot using painting effects. So just with gesso and using the pouncing method, you can really see the texture of the parking lot. I'm painting some watered down black around the edges. That'll give us some depth and really show that line between the step of the walkway and the parking lot. I'm not 100% happy with my parking lot coloring and surface just yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and add the lines. I made a little jig for my lines. I can just put this to know how far apart, do the edge, and then flip this around, and then just do the whole thing, and then flip it around and do the next one again. I've got the lines put down, the oil and grease stains put down, and the handicap spaces. I'll work more on this surface, but for now, I will call that done. On my white flat roof, I'm just adding some of that watered down black to look like more grime and dirt. It's time to add the dirt to the back of the motel. I would usually paint this foam brown, but it seems to cover pretty well with just the dirt, and I'll be putting some plants back here. Well, now that I got my dirt base down, I'll let that dry. I'll put the plants on in the very last step of the diorama, and I'm gonna go start working on the pool. I decided I needed some steps, so I'll add those to it. Just a quick recap on how I made this miniature sign for my abandoned motel series. I cut the wood out, I glued it together, and I painted it. It's really important that I paint it this wood color because I will use that later on in my project. I give it a poor quality paint job. Painting the lettering on with bent brushes is very difficult, but I tried and tried again. There's my first draft, and then I go into my second draft, and then into my third draft, which might be the final. Using that wood-colored paint, I'm just gonna go ahead and paint little lines across it. It'll look like a cracking sign. And a little bit of a dry brush technique. Now take your eyes over to the vacancy sign, and I bent wire to achieve that sign. It took over 2 hours. May the wind blow you this way again was just too much to write down there. And just watered down black paint is going to just really add that perfect amount of mildew and grime over the whole sign. I'm not sure yet where I'm going to place this on the property of the motel.
But I still have the swimming pool to do, so I still have time to think about it.
I used the balsa wood to make the fence that goes around the pool, and that took a really long time. I will add that more at the last stages. That way I still have access into the pool without destroying my fence. And I'm working on the front roadway for the motel. I made the air conditioning units out of the balsa wood, painted them white, and used my micron pen for the vents. Let's add some cracks to this diorama. I'm using my dental pick. I'm picking out a little bit of stuff. I've used some watered down black, filling in that crack, clean it up a little bit with some white, and use a fine little brush to put the lines in. I've put my tile in around the edge of the pool, and then I'll put the tile on the top, and I'll use my watercolor green pencil to put in the marks of where the algae is going to be. Then I'll come back through and paint this with my paint to make it more permanent, and then add some fine turf and to make it look like there's algae in the bottom of the pool. Step on a crack, you'll break your mother's back. Step on a line, you'll break your father's spine. Step in a ditch, your mother's nose will itch. Step in the dirt, you'll tear your father's shirt. I wanted to mention I'd use joint compound for the grout between the tiles, but once again, no footage of that. Here, I just used some of that fine turf, mixed it with glue, and I'm just going to put it all around in the bottom of the pool with some dirt. And it's starting to look really good, really abandoned and dirty. And I'll start making little junk for it. I've got some furniture. I made some lounge chairs, little pop cans. I even made a tiny little alligator to put in the bottom of the pool. I mixed some resin. I put some sap green oil paint and a little bit of burnt sienna to get this really icky green color. Put a little bit of leaves. I had some leftover material from the swimming pool, so I thought I would just go ahead and film a little landscaping segment for my abandoned motel. So I'm just putting down this yellow quartz turf, and then I'm going to start adding some of this static grass. I do have a static grass applicator, but I wasn't going to get it out for such a small amount to do right here. And then I've got some leaves, and I'm going to sprinkle those about. And I will probably come back to this later and put more weeds in the parking lot and some dirt and maybe some trees there. We're paving a new road for my abandoned USA town, and this section goes in front of the motel. I just painted all these different colors of gray, and then I use the speckling method of a watered down gray, and I do it over and over again till it looks like the road. And I lay my lines out and I paint this so it looks like I'm missing little sections. It'll look more realistic after I take the tape off. And I don't forget the yellow stripe. I'll just run the pastel where the tire tracks would go. My micron pen does really good for the tiny cracks, and this is where it's going to sit. I'll do more work to it later. Well, I worked on my fencing, and I really wanted a chain link fence, but I didn't have those supplies, so this is what's going to have to happen. I'm so close to being done with it. I'll have to paint that and make that look aged, and then I'll have to do all the weeds and little plants around it. It's time to paint that rustic fence, and I wasn't quite sure exactly what I was going to do, so I started out really slowly, and then I became a little bit more aggressive, and the fence really started to take shape. The fence turned out to be one of my most favorite things about this diorama. I add the algae all around the pool. I put some glue down, make sure it's where I would think the algae would be in the tile and on the concrete surface. And I just use a little straw to blow away the excess and get that over into a pile. And then I have my little static grass, and I'll just put that down into different little spots. And we'll put some moss on the roof too of the windmill section of the diorama. I want to apologize for all the birds in the background, but they're just everywhere around me. There's nothing I could do about that. I had limited space on my phone, so I had to make this video by piecing together other videos. And so some of them are going to be portraits, some are landscape, but thanks for hanging on. We're almost at the end of the video. I've got the graffiti on the side there with my name and the date, and a little bit of graffiti across the way of a skull. I've got plants all around. I love this miniature ivy. I have more of that. Can't wait to use that on other projects. And I got the windmill put up. I've got my sign put up, and just a tiny bit more to do. I think this turned out to be one of my favorite pieces. I made a little bit of static grass clumps onto some wax paper, made it a little bit easier for me to finish this, but this was really the last thing I had to do, was add this little grass, and then I'm done. Another project complete. Yay! The story on this is a couple bought this property in 1959. They built the one little section of the motel, and then later on added on the other section of the motel, and then added the swimming pool. I will put some trim pieces around the bottom of this, but I'm going to do that when I do all of them, so I'm just saving that up for a special day. So thank you guys for joining me and watching my video. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great one.